From the Oklahoma Newsroom, this is an OSU update. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Kyle Fredrickson. And Kyle, today we heard from the NCAA that they have finalized their penalties for Oklahoma State football. In wake of that 2013 series of stories by Sports Illustrated, NCAA came in, looked at OSU football, issued their findings earlier, but today announced penalties which weren't nothing, but not exactly on the major scale either, right?
Right. In terms of reaction to these penalties from players, coaches, everyone who was involved, it's definitely a sigh of relief. The NCAA came out and basically confirmed what OSU had said in their report in the investigation with Chuck Smurt, that much of the Sports Illustrated's claims against the program were unfounded. They didn't find enough evidence to basically corroborate what that series had said, especially about some of the paying of players and all of that really wasn't part of the table. So let's just kind of break it down simply here, what OSU is facing here with these allegations. Well, I guess they're not allegations anymore.
Right.
These are actually set in stone things. The OSU did not follow its drug testing policy for about a 4-year span. 5 players played in a total of 7 games in which they should have been withheld. That was one violation. And then the second violation was the Orange Pride program. Because it was not run under the university's watch, instead it was run under the football team's watch, there were some issues about recruiting, some of the off-campus events that they were putting on, meals, things like that. So in terms of the penalty, OSU is facing a 1-year probation, which basically means you have 1 year, don't mess up, or things are going to get very bad for you. $8,500 in fines. A 4-year suspension of that Orange Pride program, and then some self-imposed, very minor recruiting things that OSU has put on themselves in terms of the number of kids that they can have on official visits, the number of coaches that they can send out as well. So nothing major, nothing that's going to hurt this program in the long term, but it kind of puts that final stamp on this whole saga that this program's been dealing with since 2013. So. A lot of minor things, but certainly, like I said before, something that the program was hoping would finally end, and it looks like we're to that point.
Well, and you talk about self-imposed things, but not losing any scholarships, not losing any practice days. I mean, not any postseason bans of anything of that ilk. So while it will have an impact on the program, it's certainly not any sort of death sentence for OSU football.
Oh, definitely not. And especially when we look back to some of those allegations that SI had made early on, and I think it was clear from the very start, just even with some of the people they had quoted, those former players coming out and saying, hey, this isn't what I had told these guys, this isn't how it went down. From that moment on, there was always something a little fishy about the situation, which kind of segues into what's next here. These are some serious allegations SI levied against the football program. Now 2 different investigations have basically said that most of them are unfounded. Like we had mentioned, everything has been pretty minor. So in terms of what OSU or what some of these people in the stories do next is kind of the question. Are they going to bring some lawsuits against Sports Illustrated? What's going to go all into that? That's kind of probably the next step of this case that we'll be following.
And as we're taping this, Oklahoma State has yet to talk. They will have a press conference later today to discuss what they think about these penalties. So OSU may say, listen, we're done with this. We don't want any of this brought up anymore. No lawsuits from us. But there were individuals, Kyle, there were an FCA leader, an academic advisor. There were some people named by name who really, the distress that they would have gone through if, now basically the NCAA and OSU's investigation, private investigation says this isn't true. I could see how those individuals would say, now wait a second, I deserve something after all of this.
Right, especially, like John Talley, a guy that you had mentioned, the FCA director, who allegedly had players come work at his ranch, not do anything and get paid. He's already in the middle of a lawsuit against the Time Corporations and the authors of that series. So you're right, those are the guys who really this is going to be some good news from them, piggybacked on top of OSU's report. But it was interesting earlier in the day, we did get a chat with the NCAA Chief Hearing Officer, Greg Christopher, who kind of acted as a spokesman for the 16-page report that came out today. He applauded OSU's transparency. He said this should be a model for how universities handle these kinds of situations. Now, it helps in OSU's case when they were so adamant from the start that none of it was true. There was no kind of cover-up going on. They were very forthcoming about that. So that kind of lends itself to being transparent. But I think in a lot of ways it's a model for how other universities can handle this successfully. But in terms of also what we look at moving forward, another thing that's kind of interesting is this idea of the drug testing policy. In this report, Mike Holder basically said that in most of these situations, he would let the decision be Mike Gundy's on whether or not a player would play, even under some strict guidelines that say if you fail this number of tests, you can't. So that causes some conversation about whether or not there should be NCAA-wide drug testing policies. Why can't we have one thing in place to make sure that things like this don't happen again? Now, you're talking about more than 350 institutions, so having one that fits everyone's individual needs, you might run into some issues there. But in terms of either passing or failing a drug test, it seems like that might be something that could really, fix a lot of these issues that some of these programs might be having.
Lastly, you mentioned the drug testing being one of the major areas that was looked at. The Orange Pride was the other, which you hit on earlier. Now, the way I read it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the NCAA wasn't saying that the Orange Pride did anything illegal under NCAA rules, but the fact that it was being operated by the athletic department, by the football team, that was the problem, right?
Yeah, that was the major problem. I mean, having these hostess programs, isn't something that's unusual at other schools.
They happen everywhere.
Yeah, this happens everywhere. But just in terms of how they were interpreting their own rules, who was overseeing it, whether they had that control, I think was the issue. But in terms of a wide-scale look at what was going on, the infractions panel said that there was not a lack of oversight for the football program. Those things were in place. They were just either being misapplied or they weren't following the strict rule of the law that they were going by.
So the Orange Pride being suspended 4 years, good chance they have some sort of program after the 4 years, but it will be operated differently.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And it'll take a hit in recruiting. Obviously, that's another thing that the program uses to get kids to come. These young women they know everything about the program. They can tell them what life is like on campus. That's kind of what their role is. So that's going to hurt, but like you said, once they kind of revamp things in 4 years, I'm sure they'll have something in its place.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.